Okay, this is World War II. We've got this. I've got it split up into two different chapters. So today we're going to look at section 1, and that's the very beginning of the war. And to do that, really, for section 1, dictators and war, I really am just going to kind of introduce the players, as it were. So we'll talk about Hitler a little bit, and Joseph Stalin a little bit, and Mussolini a little bit. We'll kind of look at kind of go back to World War I, kind of talk about how that ended again, because if you don't remember me telling you, we went over World War I. It does set us up for World War II, and so we'll kind of review a little bit, go over some of the main characters, for lack of a better term, and then be set up to kind of get into it for section 2. All right. In 1918, World War I ended when Germany surrendered. In 1919, delegates from 27 countries met at the Palace of Versailles in France to create a peace agreement, what would become known as the Treaty of Versailles. I've got a picture on the next slide that'll show you that. Only France, Britain, and the United States really had much of a say on what would end the peace treaty. They were the Allied powers. Russia was also an Allied power, but they had left World War I, if you don't remember, in 1917 when the Russian Revolution broke out, and that's how Russia becomes the Soviet Union. So they were not there. Germany, obviously, is not going to get a say in it. They were blamed for the whole war, as we'll kind of talk about. And Japan and Italy technically were Allied powers as well, but they really were ignored during these meetings on what they were going to put in this peace treaty. The war that was meant to end all wars left behind a legacy of anger and resentment and a bitter taste for revenge in the eyes of some. Worldwide changes in the 20s and government occurred, with new countries being added from the Treaty of Versailles, and more countries having freedom. Many embraced democratic forms of government, while others moved towards something called totalitarianism. This is a theory of government in which a single party or leader controls economic, social, and cultural lives. We've had dictatorships before. That was not a new idea or new to history, but totalitarianism included a single party having control, and it was a lot more extreme, and it became a crisis in the 20s, and it took advantage of economic hardships everyone was in with the Great Depression. So that's kind of what we're going to look at today. There's that picture I was talking about. This is in the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles. On the back wall, those are mirrors, and they're reflecting the windows on the other side of the hall. I've actually been here in the Hall of Mirrors, so they're sitting up there in front of the mirrors, the guys signing the treaty, and the people you can kind of see in the audience, some of those are reporters, but the mirrors are reflecting the grounds of Versailles. So that's where the treaty signing happened. And then this chart, or bullet points, whatever we want to call it, on the right side of the slide, just goes over more characteristics of a totalitarian state. So I'm going to read off a couple of these and just kind of see if you can get, think of some countries. We haven't talked about World War II yet, but a lot of you know the gist of it. So see if you can kind of match these up with some of the countries or people that we're about to talk about. A single-party dictatorship had control over all aspects of people's lives. A strong, charismatic leader was usually at the head of the government. State had control of the economy. They used police, spies, and terror to enforce the will of the state. Government control of the media, use of propaganda to indoctrinate citizens. That's a big one, a scary one. They used schools and youth organizations to spread ideology to children. That one might surprise you, but we are going to talk about that. That happened in more than one country that we're about to discuss. And then strict censorship of artists and intellectuals, so people that would speak out against, the totalitarianism they saw going on in their country would be endangering themselves if they did it. Alright, Joseph Stalin. After Vladimir Lenin's death in 1924, Joseph Stalin took his place as the head of the Communist Party. The word Stalin actually means man of steel in Russian, which, if you don't kind of catch that joke, it's what old people like myself would associate with Superman. He is, I guess, a Russian Superman. He's just really not a good guy. He led what is known as the Great Terror once he took control of the Communist Party, purging the party of real or suspected traitors in the 1930s by ordering the death, imprisonment, or sentencing to a work camp in Siberia, and that was essentially a death sentence as well. Stalin was also determined to transform the Soviet Union into an industrial power of a nation and form a communist state-run collective farms. His efforts to do this led to the deaths of at least 10 million of his own people. We're not really sure. So, just to kind of put that in perspective, we're going to talk about the Holocaust, obviously, as we go through World War II. And 11 million people die in the Holocaust. 6 million of them are Jews. Joseph Stalin killed 10 million people right when he took power of his own people. So, I mean, yes, he is technically on the Allied side during World War II. He is not an ally with Hitler, but they are way more similar than he would be with, like, Churchill or FDR, right? Alright, Benito Mussolini. He was a soldier in the First World War, if you don't remember us kind of going over that. Although Italy had technically been on the winning side in World War I, the totalitarianism that sprang up in the country was a result of their perceived shortcomings in Versailles. Italy came to that meeting at the Palace of Versailles, and I told you they were ignored. One of the things they wanted to get out of, and that's why they were ignored, a lot of the countries there, including France a little bit and Britain, wanted to not only just punish Germany, which is what they wanted to do, but get something more for themselves. So Italy is one of those countries that wanted to gain land, make their country bigger. Japan was the same way. They wanted to gain land and make their country bigger. And when they didn't get that, there was some animosity about that. So them not getting what they wanted, the post-war depression made it nearly impossible for veterans in Italy to find work, and Mussolini was one of those guys that was a veteran, right? He was also a reporter. He had a history of working as a journalist, and so he was talented. He knew how to speak and get people's attention. He knew how to write and get people's attention. That, plus his veteran status, he was an extreme nationalist. He ended up founding something called the Fascist Party. This is a right-wing organization that promoted nationalism and promised to, quote, make Italy great again. Obviously, he would have said that in Italian, and I promise I'm not making that up. That really was his motto, if you will. And really, a lot of the stuff in my notes, it's an outline. Obviously, it's a summary for you. But a lot of it I did when I first got my job, and that's when we were using textbooks from 2008. Donald Trump was not president in 2008. I promise I'm not, making things up just to make it sound catchy, or I don't know the word I'm looking for, but that really was his motto. Mussolini's followers were known as the Black Shirts, took to the streets fighting socialists and communists. Fearing revolution and more lives lost, the Italian king was kind of pressured into allowing Mussolini to do something, which is sort of how Hitler comes into power a little bit later on. Mussolini is asked, quote unquote, to form a government by the king. Mussolini dubs himself Il Duce, or the leader, and is able to consolidate power over the government and the army within just a few years. He outlawed political parties, he took over the press, he created a secret police, he organized youth groups to indoctrinate young people, he suppressed strikes, and he opposed liberalism and socialism. All of these things I added down here at the bottom. Hitler's going to do that as well. Hitler is watching Mussolini, and he's thinking, okay, that can work. I can do it better. And so when it comes his turn, he really does strive to learn from what Mussolini did and try to improve on it, I guess you could say. After World War I and the Treaty of Versailles, Germany shrunk in size, but what remained became a democracy, at least an attempt at a democracy. Known as the Weimar Republic, they struggled throughout the 1920s to create a functional democracy. They're not the only country that did, as well as severe economic turmoil because of the Great Depression. Now, the Great Depression hit the world in 1929, right, when the markets crashed. But it hit Germany basically right after the war because they had all these reparation payments to make from causing the war. They didn't finish paying off their reparation payments for World War I until 2010. In the 1930s, the worldwide effects of the Great Depression hit the already economically troubled Weimar Republic, and to make matters worse, anti-democratic groups like the National Socialist German Workers' Party, this is the Nazi Party, right? It's a nickname they're given, begin to threaten the fragile republic. Despite the party's name, Nazis are not socialists. I know that can kind of be confusing. They actually really did not like socialism or communism. They were very, very, very extreme nationalists, I guess you could say. So take the national part of their name, I suppose, and kind of run with that. Just to kind of go back to the nationalist, I don't want you to think that it's the same thing as patriotic. You can be patriotic, that's not a bad thing, of course, but a nationalist takes it to kind of a dangerous level. When it gets really extreme like that, we're obviously going to watch some stuff about this and about about these leaders and Hitler and different things, and I'll kind of give you some examples, maybe of different national. I will make sure you understand it. So, but don't think that it's patriotism, because it really is not. That's not a good word to associate with it, because I think it would be confusing for you. Adolf Hitler took control of the National Socialist Party after World War I. He actually was working for the army, and he was assigned to watch the party, the National Socialist Party. He was working for the army, and he got assigned to go and report back to the army what they were doing, and can't keep his mouth shut and like some of the stuff that they're saying, and he gets their attention and ends up at first kind of being their propaganda minister, and then eventually he takes over the party. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Hitler was actually Austrian. He was born in Austria. He's not German, but he thought of himself as being a true German with Germanic blood. So kind of focus on Germanic there. If you'll go back and think of your world history class when you were talking about the Roman Empire, they were constantly being invaded and fighting off invaders from the north. They were the Germanic tribes that they were fighting. So Hitler believed he descended from those people, from the Germanic tribes, and he potentially did. But that's how he kind of associated himself with being a real German, even though he's not from the country of Germany. He's from Austria. He was a failed artist, a World War I veteran. He received the Iron Cross in World War I, and I had it here, a truly psychotic individual, and I truly believe that he really was psychotic. And if you, the more we talk about him, I think the more that you'll kind of understand that. While he is, while he's in prison, he attempts to take power at first by overthrowing the government. He gets arrested, gets kind of a slap on the wrist, sent to prison for like 9 months. While he's in prison, he writes his book, Mein Kampf, which means My Struggle. And in his book, he states his explanations for the problems that are facing Germany, and you can probably guess who he blames for that. He needs a scapegoat, and he picks the Jews. He is not the first person to be anti-Semitic or to be someone who's prejudiced against Jewish people. There were already people that felt that way. Racism has been around as long as the world's been around, and so is prejudice. But he did latch on to that group to blame, kind of along with the communists. And kind of the reminder I like to give my classes here is it's a lot easier to get people to hate something, unfortunately, than it is to get them to like something. And no one really wants to take responsibility for their problems. So he's giving the German people a pass. Not only is it easier to get them to hate the Jews, but he's saying you don't have to take responsibility for starting World War I or perpetuating it. We can blame it all on the Jews too. So that's kind of what he was doing here, and it worked for him. He had a lot of support. Hitler also expressed in Mein Kampf his plans for world domination. He actually wrote a second copy of his book where he talked about taking over the United States, but it was never published. But the book is definitely one of the greatest what-ifs. What if someone had stepped in and taken his book seriously? It was a bestseller in Germany. No one outside of Germany took it seriously. But in it, he lays out, like, what he wants to do and gaining this land for living space and different things like that. So I definitely wouldn't recommend you read it because I had to read portions of it when I was in college getting my degree, but it's rough to read because partly he's just a horrible writer. It's just like one long run-on sentence, but obviously it's not enjoyable. The shattered German economy, widespread hunger, homelessness, unemployment, inflation, that all played into the Nazis' hands. Anytime there's something bad going on in the country domestically, the party that's in power already is going to look like the failure. And the party that's not in party yet can be like, see, we're not the problem here, but you need to elect us so that we can fix it. And so obviously they're going to kind of hit on that. In 1933, the president of the Weimar Republic recognized the pull and power of the Nazi Party, and he appointed Hitler Chancellor of Germany. Making him Chancellor of Germany is sort of like making him Vice President. I guess that'd be the closest thing I could think to compare it to in the United States. Over the next 2 years, unchecked by the Reichstag, Reichstag's like the German parliament, think like Congress here, Hitler consolidated power and combined the office of Chancellor and President. When the president that appointed him died, he combined the two offices, made himself kind of a lone dictator, a lone monarch, a lone voice in Germany by 1935. He was a symbol of his totalitarian regime, and you can see that in the picture that I put on this slide. The images that they filtered around of him. He liked the way he looked in a military uniform, so he always had that on anytime he could kind of get away with it. They've got the sun shining behind him, almost like he's a savior, right? And then the eagle that you see on a lot of German stuff as well has some old Germanic tribe ties, and it's a symbol of victory and different things. So anyway, he achieved this status to a lot of Germans. By the 30s, Hitler's economic policies of breaking the Treaty of Versailles and rebuilding the army and different public work projects ended the depression of Germany, and he held massive rallies. And well, first they really accepted his anti-Semitic views. Eventually, they bought into them completely in Germany. In Japan, in the 1920s, they also ushered in a period of increased democracy. So there's kind of a theme here in a few of these, like Italy and Germany and now Japan, is they all tried democracy in the 20s, and then the Great Depression happens, and there's nothing anyone could have done to prepare for that at this point. The Great Depression happens, it hurts the whole world, and the people that are already in power, or in this case just trying something new like democracy, is like blamed for it, thrown out the window, and in Japan, discredit their civilian leaders, go back to traditional military-led values, and the military asserted that expanding Germany's borders, which they didn't get at the Treaty of Versailles, that's something they wanted and they were ignored, but expanding their empire throughout Asia would solve their economic problems. Because if you don't remember, Japan is an island, right? So they have to trade or try to expand like this in order to get all of the things that they need. Despite military leadership, Japan did not become a totalitarian state. There wasn't really one charismatic leader. The closest you could say would be Hideki Tojo. And a lot of people do say that. But he's never really a Stalin or a Hitler, and so we say that it's not truly totalitarian, but it's very close. Very close. In 1931, Japan attacked Manchuria. You can see it on the map, and you can see Japan, right? So it's island right off the coast by Korea, by China, and then think about where that is in the world, right? And you can see it in the little globe that's zoomed out. It's very close to some of our U.S. territories, some of our islands in that area, like Midway Island, Wake Island, the Philippines, and then Australia is down there too. It's not one of our territories. I just want you to know where it is. They attack Manchuria and take the region, establish a puppet state. In 1937, Japan moved against China, gaining control of the major railroad links and coastal areas, and the capital city of Nanjing, or Nanking. I've heard it pronounced both ways, so I apologize if one of those is wrong, but one of them's right. So cover myself there. I really have heard it both ways, so I'm not 100% positive which is correct. Japanese soldiers acted with extreme brutality, murdering over 200,000 residents, and burning a large section of the city. This became known as the Rape of Nanjing, or Nanking, because of the violence and the inhumane treatment of people. And this really was a horrific event. There's a reason they chose to call it the Rape of Nanjing. And we kind of talked about before how brutal soldiers can be in times of war, and yeah, it was horrific what they did in China. In all honesty, the League of Nations never recovered from America's refusal to join. This was Woodrow Wilson's idea, one of his 14 points, right? That we needed a world police power, kind of, but the League of Nations it didn't do anything. There was no standing army. There was no real way to enforce decrees. It was really only as strong as its members' resolve, and everyone's going through the same Great Depression, and it kind of became an every man or every country for himself kind of idea. So when aggressive nations like Italy and Germany began to test it, and the League of Nations didn't do anything, they realized, we just keep doing whatever we want. They're not going to try to stop us. Hitler was able to complete his first goal of restoring Germany's strength in about 3 years once he took power, from 1933 to 36. His next goal was to reunify all Germanic peoples, so now he's going to try to start taking land, in his mind, back for Germany. He wanted to gain Lebensraum, as he laid out in his book, or living space. He reclaimed the Sahara region from the French. In 1936, he reclaimed the Rhineland. Mussolini was also expanding the Italian Empire in Ethiopia and into Africa. And the League of Nations did nothing. Fascists were also victorious in the Spanish Civil War, which is a bloody conflict that raged from 1936 to 1939 in Spain. The nationalists who had fascist tendencies rebelled against Spain's democratic republican government. Both Hitler and Mussolini sent military and economic aid to Francisco Franco, using the conflict as kind of a practice run. They sent over some of their soldiers and some military technology to test out and use, give them some experience before they start to really expand their empire. The Soviet Union provided some support for the Republican government, but the United States, French, and British stayed out of it completely, though they said they disapproved. There on the right is a picture of Mussolini and Hitler. They did know each other. They were, I don't know if Hitler ever really had friends, but they were acquaintances. So there they are, showing their support for fascism in Spain. The policy France and Britain pursued against aggressive nations during the 30s is known as appeasement, and appeasement does not work. At least it didn't in this case. This was the policy of granting concessions to a potential enemy in the hope that they will maintain peace. If you don't know what concessions means, it means giving them something, conceding parts. Hopefully, it's you're getting something back. But this really only led aggressive leaders to believe that they could simply get away with whatever they wanted because the other party didn't really want to get into an actual fight with them. The reasons for this policy of appeasement vary. In this case, it was the Great Depression, and we didn't want to get into another war because we just got out of World War I. So, in this case, Great Depression, League of Nations couldn't really do anything. Some believe the Soviet Union was actually more of a threat than Germany, which I understand that belief. Others didn't do it because their allies, like the United States, weren't doing anything, and no one really wanted to make the first move. No one wanted to put themselves out there and potentially get into an actual war with Germany during the Great Depression and right after World War I. Hitler took advantage of that lack of unity, lack of communication between allies, to take more land. In 1938, he brought Austria, his real home country, into the Reich, or into the German Empire. In the fall of 1938, he made plans to take the Sudetenland, which is a portion of Czechoslovakia, and had a lot of ethnic Germans, like he considered himself, living there. Many believed the conflict over the Sudetenland would lead to war, so at the Munich conference, Chamberlain and the French premier met with Hitler and appeased him once again and said, okay, you can have the Sudetenland, but you have to promise not to take any more land, not to expand any more, not to invade any other countries, pinky swear that you're going to stop. So this becomes known as the Munich Pact, and Hitler abides by it for about 11 months, and then he's going to take some more land, but we'll go over that in our next section. So that's kind of our first introduction to World War II. You met, or kind of got a little bit of an idea of what some of these guys are like. We will talk about it a lot more and watch a lot more stuff about them. Make sure that you are keeping up with your work, keeping up with your notes, quizzes, whatever else I've assigned to you. If there are videos attached with this that you need to watch, make sure you watch them. And we will continue with World War II.